And now, light of my life. Light of my life, the true-to-life story of men and women living their span of years in Pine City, a typical small Midwestern community. As you'll recall, Dr. Duncan has diagnosed Mrs. Heuser's problem.
She's pregnant.
She is with child. Mr. Heuser
Early.
was much concerned by that revelation.
It cannot be my child since our marriage has never been consummated.
Consummated,
Oh, pardon
Mr.
me.
Heuser. And so, Mr. Heuser went for legal advice to Graydon Ballback.
You have a choice, Mr. Heuser. You can get a divorce, a legal separation, or you can make a citizen's arrest.
And so Mr. Heuser goes to the Heuser House of Antiques to confront Mrs. Heuser, takes with him Officer Mulder, and they do indeed make a citizen's arrest as they enter the Heuser House of Antiques.
Well, hi, Mr. Heuser. Verily I say unto thee, Mrs. Heuser, you're under arrest. That's really remarkable.
Mrs. Heuser apparently doesn't realize the gravity of the situation.
Verily, this is a very serious situation. Officer Mulder will throw the book at you.
What's this? Officer Mulder throws the book at Mrs. Heuser,
Peggy O'Neill, take that, Mrs. Heuser.
and indeed does.
You missed, Officer Mulder.
Well, what now will be move 2 on the part of Mr. Heuser and Officer Mulder?
The child, you see, Mrs. Heuser, cannot be mine since our marriage has never been consummated.
Consummated, Mr. Heuser.
I think it's consummated, Mr. Heuser.
It is consummated,
thank you.
Mrs. Heuser.
Wait a minute, I have an idea. Dr. Duncan. We can go to Dr. Duncan. They're giving tests now on babies that can indicate practically everything about the baby, the sex, the color of the eyes, and everything. Perhaps we can discover if the child is yours, Mr. Heuser.
That's a mighty good bit of thinking on the part of Mrs. Heuser, and so they leave the Heuser House of Antiques,
All right.
walk the streets of Pine City to the hospital, where they find Dr. Duncan in his office. And Dr. Duncan gives Mrs. Heuser a test to determine the certain qualities of the forthcoming child.
We can do so much now that we couldn't do just a scant 5 or 10 years ago, Mrs. Heuser. Now, take the following test. Give me the name of the Hun who ravaged Rome.
Clint.
Wrong.
Give me the name of a typical marsupial.
A Spiro Agnew.
Wrong.
I have here an isosceles triangle. How do you find the area of that triangle?
You look it up in the yellow pages.
Wrong.
All right, now I know a lot about that child. It's going to be a boy.
Verily, I'm a boy.
It's going to have green eyes.
Verily, I have green eyes.
Mr. Heuser responds as Dr. Duncan talks about the boy.
A receding hairline.
Yes.
It's going to have a mustache.
Verily, I have a mustache.
Mr. Heuser has a mustache.
And it has rimless glasses.
Well,
Verily, I have rimless glasses.
then what do we conclude from this, Dr. Duncan?
Well, I would say that the child is yours, Mr. Heuser.
But Dr. Duncan, it can't be, for our marriage has never been consummated.
Consummated, I believe. Well, isn't medicine remarkable? First, Dr. Duncan, giving Mrs. Heuser a test, determines that indeed she is going to have a baby. And now, with this most recent test, has determined that the baby will have all the characteristics of Mr. Heuser, which leads them to believe that indeed Mr. Heuser is the father of the child. Be sure to join us tomorrow when we'll hear Mr. Heuser say,
Mrs. Heuser, I want a divorce.